All right. So everyone, as usual, the call is being recorded and we'll be posting it on our website in the next couple of days. Go ahead, Katie.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, I'm in a different location. If you're used to seeing me with a typical background, at least there will be no interruptions today from little people, as I'm currently in Varanasi ahead of the high-level TB summit and Stop TB board meeting. So, and apologies, I am a bit jet lagged. So while it is the evening and not my morning as usual, it's a bit of a different start for me to the call. Welcome, everyone. Just as a reminder, there is interpretation available in French. So you should be able to see the interpretation button that looks like it has a little earth at the bottom among the icons, or perhaps depending on your app, you may need to flip through to find that. But please go ahead and use whichever English or French is more useful to you in terms of participating, and welcome. We're also recording the call in case you just joined, as Conte already mentioned, and you should see a notice for that because we do always share our GFAN call recordings on our website within a couple of days and any of the materials that go along with that. So Conte, maybe you could move the screen and just sort of show the agenda, which for today is quite simple. And given it's March 22nd, this may prompt you to understand why we're having a World TB Day kind of update, sharing some resources that our TBHLM Hub team has developed for this week, but also wanting to hear from all of you towards the end of the call in terms of your World TB Day plans or particular new resources that you wanted to share with colleagues or ask for support in terms of amplifying or further collaboration. So we'll come back to that towards the end of the call, but we thought we would start off this call and kick off by going back to a conversation that we started, I think, 2 calls ago around the catalytic investments, which I've recently learned I have been badly calling the Catalytic Initiative all of this time when it's actually catalytic investments. So apologies for that. So in learning about that, we did create a blog that you can find on GFAN's website, as well as sort of what we're calling a Catalytic Investments 101 to give a little bit more background and hopefully the right terminology to those of us who, maybe want to understand a little bit better what it is and what kind of investments are done through that portfolio of investments, as well as sort of what do we do now that we know that we haven't sort of less funded and not fully funded catalytic investment portfolio in the 7th replenishment. And so I think we'd gotten into this a couple of calls ago, and I think I gave credit at the time that the regional communication platforms for the Global Fund have been working on this as well, and that Gemma had shared some analysis with us some time ago and has been, working on this together with colleagues from the different CRG platforms. And so we wanted to invite Gemma back today to give you guys a little bit of an assessment from her perspective around, what's going on and what we know about the catalytic investments and what some of the challenges are with an underfunded sort of portfolio in that area. So Gemma, for those of you who don't know, Gemma Oberth, I think can give you her proper title, but acts as a coordinator for the CRG regional platform. So Gemma, over to you. Thanks for joining us today. It's good to see you.
Thanks, Katie. Hi, everybody. As Katie mentions, yes, so I work with the Global Fund on their Community Engagement Strategic Initiative. I coordinate the work of our 6 regional platforms who perform kind of a communication and coordination function for civil society and communities engaging in Global Fund. We've been having a conversation around the catalytic investments in that space, and Katie joined us. And so I think it's a nice idea to sort of continue the dialogue here, share that analysis here as well, and see what you guys think the next steps could be. That was something we've been brainstorming. So I'm just going to share a very short presentation. I just need permission to do so, Quentin. There we go. Okay, so just a few slides to kind of give us context here. So this is an outdated table, I've been informed. There's a number of different versions floating around, but the point of it is to remind everyone that the board had a number of different replenishment scenarios in mind. The actual numbers there are not so important, as just to recall that they had planned a set of catalytic investments in this scenario where we have a full replenishment. And then how many is it in total? 5 different scenarios that they planned, I think, depending on how much we got. And I think, ultimately our replenishment of around 14 billion is really far less than is needed. We all know that, but it has particular impact on the catalytic investments. So the way the board strategized around this was that, in each replenishment scenario, the countries are going to receive larger grants where possible, and it will be the catalytic investments that are cut. And this has quite a lot of important implications, especially for funding for civil society and communities, especially for funding for human rights and gender and key populations interventions. So it matters a lot for some of the things we pay particular close attention to. So this is a helpful slide that shows you what has happened to catalytic investments in this grant cycle 7, based on the new replenishment. So you can see all 3 parts have decreased. Strategic initiatives have gone down the most, followed by multi-country funding. And then matching funds is not as negatively impacted, but you'll see from my slides that follow that particular countries and particular matching funds are severely affected. So it's important that we're aware of which ones. So you can see the strategic initiatives, we had 20 of them in the current cycle, grant cycle 6, and this is going down to 8 strategic initiatives in the new cycle. And what this means really is there's going to be a lot less technical assistance available through the Global Fund. Most of the strategic initiatives are focused on technical assistance provision. So a lot of those support channels will disappear in the coming cycle. Now, the multi-country funding hasn't been announced yet, but you can see on this slide that they've indicated they're going to sustain 4 multi-country grants, but this might be reviewed. Now, there's a heck of a lot more than 4 in the current cycle. I was just reviewing it this morning and trying to find a complete list, but it wasn't able to pull it together in time. But there's lots of them. The only information we do have on this one is that the multi-country grant in the MENA region, which is currently implemented by Frontline AIDS, will not continue. So we heard that one from the fund portfolio manager. That's the only one we actually have kind of official communication, semi-official, about. I keep checking the Global Fund website to see when they'll update that information. But anyway, you can see the funding for multi-country grants has been cut in half, right? There was 230 million in the current cycle, and now we're looking at 112 million. And it seems like they're going to reduce the number of the grants rather than reduce the size of all of them. That's what it seems from the purple text there. Okay, so this is just to help you see the strategic initiatives that are disappearing. On the left, we have the 20 that are currently being implemented. And on the right, I think I'm right here, but these are the 8 that are continuing. So it's good that the community engagement one is continuing. That's a very important one for the work that we do as GFAN and also as the platforms. There is a budget cut, though, to that initiative. So we had 16 million in the current cycle, and we will have 14 million in the next one. So I know that still sounds like a lot of money, but by the time you allocate it to the technical assistance, to the various partners, it's going to have implications for how we structure that support going forward. I'm also aware that the Human Rights Strategic Initiative has a big decrease in funding as well. So that's a little overview there. Now, this is what I think is really helpful for people who do work at the country level, advocacy at the country level, or engaging in the funding request processes at country level, is to really see how these matching funds have changed in specific contexts. We always talk about cascades, and if they're not disaggregated by population, you actually can't see the gaps. And it's kind of the same for the matching funds. If you don't disaggregate by the country, then you don't really understand it. So, there's good news for 4 countries here: Bangladesh, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and Thailand are going to be receiving human rights matching funds for the first time. So these countries will have more money available for human rights, ostensibly. And then all the other countries are decreasing. And you can see there's 5 countries that have a cut of more than 50%. So these are the countries where human rights funding in the grants is really under threat, because there will be less ring-fenced funding for human rights and less of an incentive for the CCMs to make sure that those programs are either maintained or scaled up. So these countries these are kind of like the red flag countries are Kyrgyzstan, Mozambique, Nepal, South Africa, and Uganda. So those are places we really need to make sure that countries are not shrinking the size of their human rights programs in grant cycle 7. All right, these are now the key populations matching funds, and you can see the trends over time. Again, we have good news for Bangladesh. I think, yeah, Bangladesh is getting good news for human rights and good news for key populations. So they've got matching funds for key populations for the first time in grant cycle 7. And then a bunch of countries remain unchanged. I think there's 8 countries there that have no change. So that's good that the key populations programs there are not threatened in terms of their funding size. We've got 2 countries, Kenya and Zimbabwe, where they were receiving $10 million in matching funds in the current cycle and will now receive none. So what that means is in the current cycle, these countries had essentially ring-fenced to $20 million in KP funding, because you had to have your allocation 10 million and then you got the 10 million matching. So there was like a ring-fence 20 million for key population programs in these countries. Now, nothing. So it's just up to the countries about whether or not they keep the funding levels for key populations at the same level, or whether they make a completely different decision. That incentive to ring fence the money is no longer there. So that's a big one to watch out for. And there's a bunch of other countries where the decrease is 68%, 66%. So those are also really under threat in terms of the size of the key population programs, especially if these are countries where the CCM is not really convinced about the value of these investments, which is many countries on this list. So yeah, country level advocacy to maintain these programs is key. One of the matching funds that is affected the most is the ones for adolescent girls and young women. So there's 13 priority countries, and you can see the big change here. How many countries is it there? 7 countries are not getting matching funds at all any longer for adolescent girls and young women. So that's a big worry. And some of these had really big matching funds for women, young women. Malawi, Tanzania and Zimbabwe again had $10 million, which is effectively 20 when you include the match. Now no ring fencing at all for young women programs. So really have to push to make sure that these investments are not reduced. There is good news. There's a new matching fund, which wasn't there in the last cycle. This is for community systems and responses. So that's good news. You can see on the right the countries that are receiving this money and the amount that they will receive. The only worry about this one is what countries can spend it on is a little bit broad. They can either spend it on strengthening community health worker programs, so supporting kind of government employees who do community outreach, or it can go towards community-led, key population-led organizations, peer educators, peer navigators, things like that. So there is definitely an advocacy need to make sure that all of this extra money is not going towards government community health worker programs, and that countries are prioritizing it for peer-led, community-led, KP-led interventions. So we had a discussion with the platforms about this. Katie was there, and we talked about what can we do about this situation? What kind of attention can we bring to this as GFAN? What are the sirens we can sound and the information we can gather? So this is some of the ideas we came up with, that it might be helpful from an advocacy perspective to really pull together the impact of the catalytic investments, focusing on what they achieved in past cycles and why they're important. Potentially producing a cost of inaction report. The fundraising for this cycle shouldn't end now. There's still 4 billion underfunded, and resource mobilization should continue. So we kind of need to convince people that, if you don't fully fund the global fund, this is the impact, and it's especially catastrophic on these areas. So that's the idea, including stories of the cost of inaction. What would happen if these areas are not funded? Thinking like zooming in on key population programs in Zimbabwe, for example. What will happen there if we continue as we go? Yeah, so that's the idea. And then kind of attach an advocacy campaign to this around fully funding the catalytic investments and making sure that we don't just accept the situation that we've been given, and that as advocates, we push for the resources we need for the programs that save lives. So that's a recap of where the discussion left off. And I'll pass back to you, Katie, if we want to kind of continue thinking about these things.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gemma. It's really helpful to get your overview, as well as sort of that reminder of what we talked about in terms of possible sort of ways to take action and advocacy forward as GFAN. And, we know that that the work that the platforms do in terms of engaging with communities and engaging with colleagues who are, directly participating in CCMs is really important, so that we can really understand the impact of some of these changes. So I did just want to open it up for questions, if anybody had sort of any questions for Gemma, so that we could clarify any information. I'm seeing one hand raised and would welcome others to just raise their hand or note in the chat. If you can't find the hand raise function, then I'll try to go there as well. So I have Joanna from Unite, and then Ross from Malaria No More in the UK. So Joanna, go ahead, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Katie, and thank you, Gemma, for the presentation. I'm Joanna. I'm from Unite Parliamentarians Network for Global Health. My question is, because we are also a bit don't have enough knowledge yet about the Catalytic initiative yet. So I just wanted to understand what's the basis of decision of which funds are cutted, in which countries are selected. So we are seeing a lot of them are decreased by 100%. So I just wanted to understand what's the mechanism, what's the decision, how is this decided which countries get their funds cut? Thank you.
Thanks, Joanna. Let's take your question as well, Ross, and then Gemma, maybe you can start, and if there's anything I can add in, or others on the call, because there are definitely lots of folks who are experts in this area who are on the call. So Ross, go ahead, welcome.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks very much for the presentation from Gemma, really handy. I guess, sorry, for those engaged with the malaria community here and through the RBN partnership, there's been quite a lot of discussion on the catalytic funds that have gone down to zero. And I guess I was just interested on any perspectives in how the Secretariat can work with the community here and how the community can work, because obviously having all of these individual catalytic funds rather encourages individual donors, individual high net worth individuals, philanthropic foundations and so on and so forth to sort of cherry pick. And it doesn't necessarily mean that if there is additional replenishment, ongoing through this cycle, that necessarily it'll, it seems like there's a lot of potential for earmarking from private individuals and so on and so forth. And look, we're very short. We need to raise money here, but I'm just interested on how people think that practically might work. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, Gemma, I think you've added sort of a part of the answer. A big part of the answer is that a lot of the decisions around the Catalytic investment portfolio are not made in sort of a transparent way, like which strategic initiatives kind of are being, well, that was a bit more transparent, but in terms of which countries were eligible within matching funds, for example, or which countries were necessarily eligible within multi-country grants, or why there's new ones, that's not exactly transparent in terms of how the multi-country grants, for example, are done from the Catalytic investments. It's a little bit more obvious to tell through the allocation methodology, and for the multi-country grants that are determined in that fashion. So I think the big question, Ross, that you're sort of raised. So Joanna, just to say to you, like, it's not clear why some countries had necessarily had their matching funds reduced and others did not, or had them increased, or there's new countries. That's not 100% clear to us either. So I think that could be, you know, maybe a really good starting point with the Secretariat. And I know there's some colleagues from the Secretariat on today, but I don't think any of those colleagues are experts in this particular area, but welcome any thoughts that they might have. But I think that's a good starting point to ask some of those questions of the Secretariat. And then Ross, to sort of your point, like there's the only methodology or the only way currently for additional resources that are raised in between replenishments after the allocation methodology has been run is through the Register of Unfunded Quality Demand, which is essentially that kind of technically reviewed and found to be sound, but not funded through the country allocations that gets put onto this register. And yes, there can be a little bit of cherry picking in terms of what donors may want to fund through the UQD, because there isn't a set or understood way of prioritizing that. And there, I believe, it has never been this situation where the Catalytic initiative has decreased. It's only, I think, 2 cycles old. Gemma, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is sort of only its 3rd cycle. And I think I called it the Catalytic initiative again and not the Catalytic investments portfolio. So apologies, but so I don't think that we've had this scenario before. And so it's not so clear about how we there isn't a clear methodology, as you say, like it's uncharted territory, and there isn't a clear methodology in the funding policies, in board decisions, and how things are done to make sure that if new funds are raised, that it could go to the Catalytic initiative investments. Sorry, but also it is possible to change these things, right? We've made a lot of adjustments over the last few years, especially in the context of COVID, but at other times as well, in terms of looking at those. Whether there's a will to do that within the board of the Global Fund is sort of another question, but I think it's something that's worth exploring. And part of the way to explore that is to find the evidence about why it would be important to channel some further funding, if further funding were available, into the Catalytic investments portfolio. So it's uncharted territory, but also we also have a decent body of evidence, and Gemma's just corrected that the matching funds only came in 2 cycles ago, but that strategic initiatives and multi-country grants have been there for almost a decade now, for several cycles. So yeah, I hope that's helpful. We had hoped to have Beatrice Stickers, who sits on the Developed Country NGO delegation and is a former AFC chair, but she wasn't able to join the call today, but she has a better understanding of some of these technical things. And we've discussed this before as well within the Developed Country NGO delegation. And so people are thinking about it to try and see what the possibilities are and where there might be some political will within the board and within those kinds of conversations. Colin, over to you.
Thanks, Katie. And this has been a super helpful presentation. So thanks, Gemma. And this follows a bit on Ross's question. And I both like fully agree on some of the risks around earmarking. And at the same time, I think if that is sort of logistically possible, and if it might be done anyway, making sure that we as advocates like really take advantage of it, I think it feels like an opportunity at the same time. And even thinking about donors where there might not be an incentive or a willingness to step forward with a really small amount of money toward what is a $2 billion gap, it doesn't feel as inspiring. But as a donor, like if I knew that, say, $10 million or 20 or $50 million could make a really transformational difference through one of these funds, that could be a really different kind of incentive. And I'm thinking about moments like the TB high level meeting this fall. Like, could someone, you know, a donor at a relatively small level come forward with 10 or 20 million that could make a really big difference, announce it on a stage, and really make an impact in one of these funds? So I think that is something really interesting to talk through with the Global Fund. And then a question, which I don't know if anyone on this call is deep in this, but is to the point you were making, Gemma, about the pieces of this that are essentially like technical assistance, so not the matching funds, but the TA pieces, if and how that has been mapped against some of the TA set asides from the replenishment. I mean, certainly the French, but others as well. And if there are ways that we as advocates can be pushing for bilateral TA to help fill some of those gaps that might be existing. And again, with understanding the inherent risks there of like, we don't want to set precedent of like, yeah, it's good that you do TA set-asides, but given where we are, how do we take advantage of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point around the set-asides. And I think there have been conversations as recently as last week at the strategy committee around those set-asides. And, you know, sort of, for those of you who've been around for a while, I do remember conversations after the last replenishment about those set-asides and trying to understand what they are as well, because it's a little bit more opaque to us. They're run primarily by countries. They don't necessarily report into the Global Fund, or there isn't really a report that kind of clearly indicates how those set-asides operate in partnership with the Global Fund in a specific way. Like, it's kind of stated, but it's not particularly specific. So I think continuing to push around more transparency and more clarity around how those complement the work that's being done by the Global Fund in a more specific way is good advocacy that's a part of this. And just to go back to the question around the sort of earmarking and stuff, I mean, I think that's true, but it's a challenge. But it's also like, we already have a set level of prioritization within the Catalytic initiative, right? Like, we already determined and the board already agreed to sort of a scaling up depending on how many resources were available. And so to some extent, like, there would be a bit of earmarking because we know what level we're at and we know how much we would need in the Catalytic portfolio to get to the next level and what those things would be, like where those investments would go theoretically according to the decision that was already taken. So it's earmarking, but it's also a little less specific in that way. Like, I don't think you would need to be able to say, okay, your money directly is going to go to this, you know, your 10 million is going to go to this particular pot, because you could say, like, this first gap to get us up to 600 million from 400, these are the kinds of things that, you know, the board already previously agreed to fund at these levels. So there's, you know, so like, yes, it's earmarking in a way because it's earmarking it to the Catalytic investment portfolio, if that were possible. But there's already sort of a pre-agreed sort of set of decisions as to where those investments would go at that level of funding, if that makes sense. So from, at least that's my perspective, but like, that's why we'd hope to have Beatrice here, because she understands these things significantly in more detail. So yeah, and I think, you know, I think, Robin, yes, I mean, you know, generally speaking, had we gotten to the higher levels of the Catalytic investment portfolio in terms of its funding, there would have been more scope for a lot of work around, you know, expanding and rolling out innovation, right? Like the TB shorter regimens, for example, would have likely, you know, there would have likely been support for that. The malaria vaccine, there would have been more support for that potentially through you know, a higher Catalytic investment. So understanding that the difficulty is that a lot of these things, like the matching funds, is a little bit more clear in terms of like where it is, and multi-country grants becomes more clear, but like the strategic initiatives, they kind of tend to remain a bit opaque and less transparent to us on the outside, which is not to say that it's not reported against and those kinds of things, but it's not teased out very specifically. Yeah, Joanna? I see you have your hand raised again, and I don't think it's residual, so please go ahead if you wanted to jump in.
Yes, hi again. Sorry, I just wanted to go back to Gemma's presentation specifically on the strategies that you have thought out in the future to implement, namely a set of key asks and to showcase what can be the downfall or disadvantage of not having this funds for these countries. So I would just like to say that from Unite's perspective, it would be very interesting for us to receive all of that sort of information to give back to our parliamentarians. You know, we've been working with the Global Fund in several activities that involve our parliamentarians, namely showcasing how the Global Fund acts, what type of initiatives they have, and where the donor countries are actually investing the money. So I think it would also be very interesting for our parliamentarians to know what happened from this lack of investment, and they themselves can be the ones asking to the Global Fund Secretariat, how do you decide, how do you take these decisions? So please feel free to share it with us once you have some more concrete information. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Joanna. That's really helpful to know, and glad to have you on the call today. I think what we wanted to do at this stage, if there aren't any other questions or things for clarity, Gemma, is there anything that you wanted to say to kind of wrap up it all? Not to put you on the spot, but you didn't actually speak up during the Q&A, so maybe I just like jumped in too fast. Is there anything you wanted to say to wrap up after your excellent presentation and sharing of what's been discussed so far?
No, just that these slides can be shared, and the information was also published by AidSpan in one of their articles. So those tables that I shared are publicly available. So if they're helpful for you in your advocacy, you can make use of them. I've been kind of commenting in the chat, but yeah, I fully agree that one of the advocacy points can be, increased transparency around how these decisions are made. If things get discussed at board level, that's always helpful because we get to see the board documents. So that's maybe one thing we could be pushing for. We want the board to be looking at these proposed situations and the rationale that goes along with them, why countries are chosen, how much each country is getting. If there could be rationale provided, it would help us. So yeah, I agree with what everyone said. Thanks.
Thanks, Gemma. And we will share those slides as resources to this call and point you all towards them on our website so that you have them, because they are kind of in different places. And I know that some of the analysis is Gemma's to figure out some of the percentage increases and those kinds of things. But what I wanted to do now then is just pass it on to Conte. He shared at the beginning, and I mentioned a little bit at the beginning, some of the resources that we've tried to develop around this. So I just wanted to pass it to Conte to share about that a little bit more specifically. And again, any questions, and then we'll get to the topic du jour of World TB Day, which is coming up in 2 short days. Conte.
Sorry, everyone. I'm working on my laptop and my screen. Yeah, my screen looks like it's having a stroke. So thanks, Katie. So I've reposted in the chat some of the documents that we've worked on to help everyone engage with a fairly dry and technical topic. And so we have we worked on 2 things. One that we've released, I think 2 weeks ago now, which is an opinion piece on our website, a blog that tries to look at contrasting how much empowering community and putting people at the center was central to the new global fund strategy, which is something that that is great and that that the 3 delegations on the board were really fighting for, etc. And so we present on one hand, you have a strategy that is very ambitious on these topics, and on the other hand, because of the outcome of the replenishment and the way catalytic investments have been slashed, it looks like we're much further away from realizing that vision than we were in the last cycle. It's probably a bit early to tell, but it is quite concerning to see some of the cuts that have been done through catalytic investment. On screen now, you have some calculations that we've made and that you can find on the second document, the Catalytic Investments 101. And so thematically, we see that the cuts have been the highest in HIV, TB, and malaria, and there's been the least cut in RSSH, so resilient and sustainable systems for health. That is partly reflecting the fact that according to the scenario that was voted on by the board, the catalytic investments should have been reduced all the way down to 200 million. But there were a number of pledges by the private sector in particular that could only be realized if there was additional investment in specifically RSSH. So as a result, the catalytic investments were increased back up to 400 million. All that to say, the net outcome of that is that we have a very skewed distribution of resources during that cycle within the catalytic investments portfolio. So that's the case if we look thematically across the 3 diseases and systems for health. It's also the case if we look, and that's something that Gemma touched on, that's another visual that is in those resources. If we look specifically at the matching fund, which is a bit more specific in terms of the areas where the money is spent, the reduction has been dramatic across key populations, less across human rights, and really dramatic when it comes to adolescent girls and young women. So the blog talks about these different points and really tries to show that what kind of consequences we will see out of such reductions in catalytic investments, and the fact that we know what kind of gaps exist in through country grants. That's why we have catalytic investments, and that this cycle we do not have the money to fill those gaps. And so we argue in the piece that it's important that we find a way to make sure that additional investments, additional pledges that would come in between now and the next replenishment, at least could be, because the current problem is that there is currently no way for extra money to be specifically directed towards catalytic investments. So we called for a decision on in that matter. The other piece is a catalytic investments 101, because we realized when we put out the blog that the blog wasn't really the right place to go into the numbers. That's something that some people that are less number inclined on the team have pointed out. And so we released that separate piece that goes into a bit more depth in what is the catalytic initiative what are catalytic investments going to look like this cycle, where are the cuts exactly, with a few visuals to help the two ones that we've shared on the screen, to help everyone understand where the cuts are taking place and why they're taking place that way. Though of course we can only assume why the decisions were taken, because as we shared, this was not transparent. It's not a transparent process. So yes, so do go find both resources on our website. I've shared them in the chat, and we hope that can be a basis to keep to make sure that conversation keep going, and that we keep pushing for the Secretariat to give itself the means to actually realize the vision of its new strategy. Back to you, Katie.
Great, thank you, Conte, and thanks for getting those two pieces legible and with the correct terminology before we shared it with colleagues, because of my longstanding belief that it was called the Catalytic Initiative. So please do go ahead and make use of those resources in any way that's useful to you. And always, we do welcome sort of other questions as they come up to you, or as you have these conversations back with, country colleagues or within your own regions. And if there's any way that we can support with further background or sharing of information, but this feels like a piece of inquiry that we're going to continue with along with other partners like Gemma and the platforms, to make sure that we're documenting the impact of this reduction in the portfolio and coming up with a plan to try and advocate for some prioritization of that. So hopefully that's something that resonates with all of you. I think we were going to do a poll, but just to check in on that. But I think what we'll do instead is just move on to our next topic so that we don't lose any time in that. But hopefully this resonates with you and this is useful, and we'll be touching back around this again as we get more answers and as we have more information. So World TB Day is happening in 2 days, and you can see these lovely backgrounds that my colleagues have with "Yes, we can end TB," which is the theme for this year's World TB Day. I know that over our GFAN listserv, the Global Fund shared some of its resources for World TB Day. There have been others that have been shared, including from our TBHLM hub. So I'm going to pass it over to Robin to share with you a little bit about that and the launch of a particular tool that's coming up or just happened. But time zones are still messing with my head. So Robin, you take it away and give everyone the actual facts.
Thanks, Katie. Much appreciated. Hi, everyone. And yes, on March 24th, so that's 2 days from now, it is World TB Day. And yes, we can end TB if we all start taking collective strategic advocacy action to make the high-level meeting in September, a high impact moment and a moment for re-energizing political commitments to NTB, and also a moment to mobilize additional resources for the fight against tuberculosis. So I never want to say happy World TB Day or happy any day that's a serious issue day. It shouldn't be a happy day when there's so much work that we have to do to achieve our targets for 2030, but we can make it a powerful take advocacy action day. And that's exactly what the TB HLM affected communities and civil society organization coordination hub is striving to do alongside all of you. So I'm going to share my screen for a moment to walk you through some of the resources we've developed for you to essentially localize and deploy at the national level, either before World TB Day, on World TB Day itself, or immediately following World TB Day. So here we go, share screen. Okay, lots of tabs open. Okay, so this is our GFAN dedicated landing page for the Affected Communities and Civil Society Coordination Hub. This is your go-to space and place for the latest information around what's happening in this advocacy track. So right under here, you'll see our current call for action. We're updating this regularly, so this will change with time. But right now, the main ask and action we have for all of you is to reach out to key targets at the national level. So that's your heads of states, your members of parliament, and your representatives with UN missions to start building relationships and make some key action asks of them right now. So we've developed this toolkit. So if you just click this link, you'll be brought to a Google Drive folder, which is our style of collaboration, apparently, with a number of different folders for different languages, because we're wanting to be as inclusive as possible. So we're going to constantly translate into French, Hindi, Russian, and Spanish. So each language has its own folder. Once you go in here, you'll see a few key resources that can be leveraged for World TB Day. The first one to look at is this template emails and letters that gives a bit of an overview as to why taking this action now is important. And really it's because we need to start these communications now so that we can line up the dominoes to engage with these targets in the lead up to the multi-stakeholder hearings that we know are happening on May 8th and 9th. And that is really our critical moment for influencing the political declaration. So we need to start this outreach ASAP, essentially, so that we can have those conversations with those key targets before the political declaration is even written. All right, so we've got template letters, one to your head of state, one to a member of parliament, and then one to your reps at the UN mission. All of these letters are meant to be adapted and localized. You're the expert, pull in your own experiences and make it your own where you like to. You might also want to put it on a nice letterhead. You might need to have a formal address to each person. So that work needs to definitely be done by you, but this is meant to be the foundation for you to get started on your high-level meeting advocacy and outreach. Okay, so alongside sending these emails or letters to your targets, we've got a couple of assets that you can include in that outreach that would be helpful. And I'm just showing you English right now. One of those is a prettily designed invitation to the high-level meeting to your head of state that you want to attach to that email to them and hit send on. You also want to attach that to your outreach to the MP, because your MPs can send this on to the head of state too, as added pressure for them to show up to the high-level meeting and make an ambitious pledge or commitment. So there's that asset that you can leverage. And then lastly, we've developed a scorecard resource right here that links back to the targets and commitments from the 2018 high-level meeting on TB and gives a snapshot of where we're at a global scale using the traditional traffic light scoring. And as you can see, we're in the red zone. We only have one green zone target being met. So this is an asset that you can use to kind of make it clear that the need for renewed political commitment investment is very, very real. Some of you might even have national or regional level scorecards that already exist. So if you do, add those as well. And then the last, oh, I stopped sharing. Didn't mean to do that. And then the last asset and toolkit that we've developed that you might want to make use of is, as ever, a social media toolkit. If I can get to it. Here we go. Social media toolkit. So thanks to Quentin, we've got a couple of social media tiles here that you could post up on Twitter with some sample tweets that you can just copy, paste, and hit publish on. So that is our World TB Day toolkit that we hope that you all start using ASAP. I just want to show you one final thing, because this is all part of a bigger picture plan and an advocacy strategy that has started now and will go to post the high-level meeting. So if you just take a peek on our landing page here, we've got this roadmap that can help you take stock of where we're at in that process at any given time. And it shows you what the key moment is, what you can expect coming from the hub to support you in advocacy, and how you as an advocate can crowd into these moments to make the best use of those moments in the lead up to the high level meeting. So right now we're at March World TB Day, and we're using World TB Day as an advocacy and engagement hook to start our high level meeting advocacy and do that target outreach. And you've got that toolkit from us to hit the ground running, but you'll hear from us later if and when you secure meetings with those targets. We'll be supporting with developing draft run of shows. We'll be prompting you to leverage the Deadly Divide 2.0, which will have key asks coming from the community to localize them to your nation and to show up to those meetings with asks that are relevant to you. So just to say that there's more coming from us, and this is just the start, and we hope that all of the resources we've developed are useful. And yes, we can, NTB, if we have a powerful Take Advocacy Action World TB Day and start coordinating towards the high level meeting now.
As always, Robin, an energetic and passionate presentation, and thank you so much. There's a whole bunch of new resources there, and as Robin said, available in a number of different languages already, and more to come as we work forward, and that advocacy sort of you what you can expect and what the focus will be. So hopefully that helps in terms of your planning beyond World TB Day as well over the next few months. So welcome any questions or comments for Robin, but also just wanting to note that we have another colleague who has a lovely TB specific background on for their call, Charlie from the communications team at the Global Fund. So just wanted to pass it over to you, Charlie, to come in and share with us a bit about some of the social media and other sort of assets that you have and messaging that you're hoping for members to amplify for World TB Day from the Global Fund. So Charlie, over to you. It's nice to see you.
Thanks so much, Katie, and it's great to see you and everyone. It feels like it's been a while, so it's great to be back on the call. Yes, I just figured out how to upload our backgrounds onto to Zoom, so I'm pleased to share that this is the kind of creative graphic approach that we're going for throughout the Global Health Campus at the Secretariat and also widely on social media. So we've got tons and tons of great activity and quite a few stories going out. So hopefully everyone's received the toolkit links already, but I can drop them into the chat for anyone that missed them. We've got a lot of media activity happening. There's no one from our media team on the call today, but they have sent me over a load of points to highlight, too many to mention really. But a couple of highlights. We placed an op-ed of Peter's in the Telegraph yesterday. And there's also an op-ed in the works from Elliot, our head of TB, which is in the process of being placed. We hope that will get picked up before Friday. We've got a blog going live on Friday from Yulia in Ukraine, who's a TB outreach worker. So we will be pushing her story out. And there will just be lots and lots of activity on social media that we hope you can all amplify. We are also thinking about other tools that we can be developing in the run up to the UN high level meeting. So it's a bit of watch this space on that. I think we'll be in touch, especially we know that lots of people are having events and things and want stuff to take to them or leave behind. If you have any requests of anything that you think would be super useful, please do feel free to drop me a line. But we're already looking at maybe a paper that we can produce and anything else. And we're also already starting to think about our positioning for UNGA this year and all three of the UN high-level meetings and how we bring all of our positioning together across those three meetings that are very important. So lots of activity taking place. I'll stop there, and if anyone has any questions, just let me know.
Thanks, Charlie, and thanks, Claudia, for putting in the links to the English and the French social media toolkits from the Global Fund. There's a lot of resources in there if you haven't had a chance to go in there. Any questions for Robin or Charlie or anybody else wanting to jump in with sharing something that they're doing for World TB Day? Just please raise your hand or note in the chat whether or not you wanted to jump in. And Charlie, just a question from Robin about whether you have something specific on the web for the Global Fund around the HLM or around the HLMs, I guess, as there are several of them.
That's a really good question. We don't at the moment. We are going live with a World TB Day webpage, which will go live. I need to check with the web team. It's either tomorrow afternoon or on Friday morning. So that will go live. But I need to check whether we will have a separate one for the high level meetings and whether we'll do separate ones or one for all of them. So watch this space and I'll make sure that that question gets answered.
Thank you. And Conte, you've raised your hand somehow, which I didn't think as hosts you could do that. So now I'll have to learn how that happens. But Conte, go ahead with your question, please, sir.
No, not a question. I just wanted to flag, since no one was jumping in, that we're going to be releasing a blog for Stop TB Day that's already online about our wonderful speaker, Annie, and some of the programs that she's been putting together, that she's been working on in Indonesia, and a bit of a story as well. And so it's not like a big campaign plan. That's all for Robin's part. But yeah, so just wanted to flag that that blog, and I don't think Annie is on the call, but if she is, she does great work, and we're really happy to get to feature her.
Thanks, Conte. Any other quick jump-ins? I see Sylvia from Canco in Kenya. Sylvia? I'm not sure if you're unmuted, Sylvia. We can't hear you at the moment. Okay. Oh.
Not yet.
Yes, now we can hear you. Go ahead, please. Welcome.
I'm very grateful for all the well thought through presentations, very informative. My comment, so Kenya, we've been working around the two areas. Kanko has been spearheading the work around the UN high-level meeting, preparation for those asked, and also World TB Day concurrently. So what has happened, we've already met with the members of parliament, presented our asks for the UN high-level meeting, and we managed through that interaction to get the president to be the one who will be coming for the World TB Day on Friday. And we are going to one of the high burden counties, and there he'll be launching a multi-accountability framework document. But at the same time, we just seek his participation at the UN high-level meeting. My question was to Robin, especially the last slide that you put up, and you talked about I know there's this document you're waiting for, the divide document, and you put it as one of the activities keen for next month. So how do we, yes, when it's out, what are those things that you hope we can do as advocates together in order to support our advocacy going forward? And just try to put up that last slide on the actions. Thanks. Thank you, everyone. Very grateful. Learning a lot. Thanks.
Thanks, Sylvia.
Thanks,
and great
Sylvia.
to... Go ahead, Robin. No, go ahead.
Just jumping in with a response. Thanks, Sylvia. We're really grateful for all the great work you're doing in Kenya. I'll share the link to that webpage where that roadmap is, so you can take a closer look at it again. But just to flag that the idea is this week, the Deadly Divide 2.0 will be launching here at the World TB Day Summit. And once we have that, we're going to engage the entire community again, as we typically do, through the TB civil society listservs, GFAN listservs, as well as through our now going to be bi-weekly deep dive calls, to start to reflect on those key asks as a global community. And then at the national and regional level, take time to huddle and figure out which ones align most with the priorities for our nation. Which ones do we really want to lean into as a community of advocates? Which ones might our our country be well placed to champion? And from there, then you'll be more equipped to go into those meetings with those targets. Ideally, from the work that you do right now, with the template emails we sent you, you'll secure some meetings with members of parliamentarians. You'll secure a meeting with your UN mission rep, and maybe even if you want to reach out to your ambassadors, you could do that too. And in those meetings, you'll take those more localized key asks to start having conversations around how you want your nation to show up at the high level meeting itself. So it's a collaborative effort. It's global support and big level strategy, but everything we do needs to be localized at the national level by you, the advocates who are sitting in those country contexts.
Thanks, Robin. And I did just put up that landing page again on the GFAN website for everybody to bookmark, because that's where you'll keep seeing different things pop up. And I'm sure some adjustments to that roadmap will be made when something throws a challenge in our way, or some timeline changes from what we currently believe. So keep that bookmark so you can check in on that. We're really close to the end of the call, so I did just want to take the liberty, as I'm not sure that any of those colleagues did join, but in the last, I'm just trying to find it. It was actually today, the 22nd, so actually still in the same day, but that Stop AIDS had shared over GFAN a number of briefs that they're working on, which are related to the TB high-level meeting, but also the UHC and PPR ones, which we talked about on our last call. And there's an opportunity to input into the work that they're doing in the briefings in terms of feeding into the key asks and dissemination and advocacy around those from Stop AIDS perspective. So I just wanted to flag that. I didn't see anybody from Stop AIDS on today's call, but I thought it was an interesting set of documents. We had mentioned this before in terms of how those different HLMs work off of each other, and how there's some consistent messaging across them and some distinct messaging too. So I just wanted to highlight that was circulated sometime in the last 12 hours, and you should be able to find that on the GFAN listserv and in your emails therefore. So now that we are at the hour and I don't see any other questions or any hands raised, and I'm sure people are running to another call, but just a plea, please look out for those resources around World TB Day. Please try and amplify those from us, from the Secretariat, from the Stop TB Partnership, from other colleagues who lead in the TB spaces, and just let's try and make this as big of a splash as we can so that we can get more minds tuned into the high-level meeting later this year. And thanks again to Gemma from the beginning of the call and our conversation around the catalytic investments, and just a topic that I think we'll just keep coming back to and developing more resources and asking more questions and coming to you all with suggestions around work and advocacy that we can do together. So thanks for a great call, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. And thanks for sticking it out till the end today. And thank you again to our interpreters for providing simultaneous interpretation for those who needed it today. So thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. Thanks, Conte, for running our call as usual.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.